Today we have Dr. Taylor Stein, who so very kindly agreed to come and talk with us today. So Dr. Stein is a professor at the University of Florida in the School of Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences. He received his PhD in forestry from the University of Minnesota in 1997, an MS in forestry from Northern Arizona University in 1994, and a BS in recreation resource management from Utah State University in 1992. He joined UF in 1998 with teaching, research, and extension responsibilities in ecotourism, nature-based recreation, and natural resources management, with a focus on identifying tools and techniques to plan and manage for the multiple benefits, nature-based tourism and recreation. So thank you, Taylor, for being here, and I'll just hand it right over to you.
All right, thanks. All right, and how much time do we have? Till 2:45, is that right?
Yeah, so 2:45, if we could have a few minutes for question and answer, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'll try to do that. All right, I'll just start going here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's rare that I get a chance to talk about my research. I do a lot of teaching, but I don't get into the research aspects very much. So I had a variety of projects to talk to you about, but as the people who know me, I also like to preach a lot. Most people don't even know that there is such a thing as people who study ecotourism and recreation. So I'm going to do a little bit of preaching in this case about what that is. Florida is unique to only have one person, and I believe I'm the person, unless the other person's hiding out there, who really studies how to manage natural areas with recreation and tourism as part of those areas. We have good recreation and tourism programs at UF as well as other universities, and there was a time where even the recreation program here, it was in the tourism department, had other natural resource people, but they've all moved on, and that's turned into a more tourism and hospitality type program. And so, but places like Georgia and NC State, they have a lot of people like me. So I'm gonna say, it's more than just me doing this, and I'm not that unique. So there's a lot of research going on out there. What I want to talk about is probably my longest term project. I think it gives a good example of the type of research I do. Data's a little old, but still, we've been doing this research for a while. It hasn't changed too much. So I still think it's relevant. So we'll be talking about basically hikers, differentiating hikers, trying to understand visitation on the Florida National Scenic Trail, that orange line through the state. All right. This has been funded for almost 20 years now by the U.S. Forest Service, who is the agency that manages the trail. And then their nonprofit group that we work with a lot is the Florida Trail Association. So I want to do a shout out to them as well. And then what you all can expect today, I'm going to talk a little bit about long distance trails, just kind of the way the U.S. works with them and thinks about them. Talk a little bit about the benefits. Why do we even have these things in the United States? Focus in a little bit on the FNST, or the Florida Trail. And then finally, the last part will be on the research. And basically, I'll be doing a market segmentation of Florida Trail visitors, a common social science way of trying to understand who our people are out there. So U.S. National Trail System. Basically, this is a hard to read map, but all those colored lines are some sort of national trail within the country somewhere. Here, I'll go to this to just tell you the 4 different types that follow under this national trail system. The one we'll be talking about today is the National Scenic Trails. There's only 11 of them out there. The most famous being the Appalachian Trail, which hopefully some of you have heard of. They have to be 100 miles or longer, primarily non-motorized, but don't have to be totally non-motorized, but primarily. And they're established by an act of Congress. So this is a big deal, especially if you know our Congress that probably can't pass anything to save their lives. It seems like at some point they have to agree to create a new trail. Maybe why there's only 11 of them. Then a little bit more is National Historic Trails. These follow travel routes or National Historic Significance. So Santa Fe Trail, Natchez Pierce Trail. Those are the type of historic trails out there. National Recreation Trails, these are not passed by an act of Congress. So you can see once we get Congress out of it, a lot more stuff pops up. Over about 1,250 of these are out there. Regional and local trails in urban areas, federal, state, and can be on federal, state, or private lands. And then finally, side trails are basically going to be nice, established, well-managed trails that aren't really have to be recognized by the federal government at all, but somehow connect into these trails. And I'm fine if anybody wants to burst in and ask me a quick question if I go over something too quickly, and I'll try to respond on the fly. Like I said, we'll be focusing in on National Scenic Trails for this talk. And so here we are. Here's the 11, actually Natchez Trace Trail is officially a National Scenic Trail, so sorry, it sounds like a historic trail. But you can see the other ones there. The famous one again is the Appalachian Trail, but some of you probably know Pacific Crest Trail or the Continental Divide Trail. And actually I see Ernesto is on. So Ernesto, he's my PhD student who is doing research on hopefully the Appalachian Trail, Continental Divide Trail, and the Pacific Crest Trail, hopefully. You might get 2 of them. He's done the Appalachian Trail already. But they're all wonderful places. You can see how long they are. Only 2 of them are within only 1 state, the Arizona Trail and the Florida Trail. Others cross multi-states. And then people who hike the entire length are called through hikers. That's a rare breed. They're famous, so we think if you're hiking the Appalachian Trail, you're a through hiker, but most people who hike on the Appalachian Trail or any of these trails are really just doing sections of it. Then we got the real rare breed like Bart Smith here, who's hiked every one of these National Scenic Trails. So those are the freaks of nature out there who are basically, that's what they're doing. So that's the type of thing we're talking about in this case and our trails down here, Florida Trail. Now, why do we care? Well, there's a lot of reasons to care. If you're into pop culture, here's a couple of reasons why. 2 books were written about some of these that had movies made after them too. A Walk in the Woods about the hiking on the Appalachian Trail, and then Wild hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail. And both, again, like I said, movies were made after. And actually, Wild with Reese Witherspoon was a pretty award-winning movie that got a lot of attention, got people thinking about that trail. But really, those 2 books and movies focused on through hikers, but that's a minority of use. If you've been to the Great Smoky Mountains, you might have very well hiked on the Appalachian Trail and not even known it. If you've hiked in Ocala National Forest, you might have hiked on the Florida Trail and not even known it. Most users out there are hiking, but only for a few hours, maybe just a couple days. And while it's the vast majority of use, we don't often think about them. But the managers think about them because they're the ones out there working. So why else do we care again? Well, these long distance trails, this isn't the official National Scenic Trails, but long distance trails bring in a lot of money. So not only are they just famous and people make movies about them, even the ones that maybe you haven't heard of are making a lot of money. So this is the Great Allegheny Passage Trail at the top there. It's basically Pittsburgh, goes on down south of that. So in the eastern United States, it makes a few bucks for the local economy. $32 million is what an economic study has done on that trail. And so that, with businesses getting about 6 million, so local businesses that are catering to the recreation use. Now, again, it's not just people who are doing the entire trail. These are probably local people from Pittsburgh and surrounding areas that are going out for a day, stopping off at restaurants, getting food like that. So they're making these impacts just from local recreation. Now, if we go into the rural areas, this is in like central western Washington, is the Matthew Valley Trail. Another economic study was done on this. So not as much, but still $4.5 million in part of a rural area that probably doesn't get much other than snow. Maybe, I think it's a ski resort there, but in the summer, they're still getting a lot of money. And so this is, again, very important to the local economy in these areas. So the money benefits is something that always gets people excited. So what do we want from these trails, like the Florida National Scenic Trail, Appalachian Trail? Well, we want it all. We want those economic benefits and we want the environmental benefits. So jobs and economic growth, a lot of regional planners, tourism people, they're thinking about it. But then we got to think about why people are even going to come out on these trails. I mean, why are people spending the money to do this? You know, if they're just wanting to go on a walk, well, walk outside, go out your front door and start walking. But there is a reason why they're going to go to the Appalachian Trail and do it. There's a reason why they're going to drive to the Ocala National Forest and walk there. And you ask them those questions, they're going to come up things like be with my family or learn about education or feel a sense of accomplishment. And so if we're not giving them those benefits, they're not going to come. But then these trails are going through natural areas too. And there's benefits by having corridors. So wildlife corridors, we can start connecting natural areas and we can use recreation or tourism as a reason to start connecting these corridors. You know, not only do the hikers want to do it, well, the bears need it and the other mammals need it, or the birds also need it. And so environmental benefits come from these type of things too. So there is a lot of benefit from having these long distance trails out there besides just the economic benefits. But when we're talking about decision makers and we're asking them to spend money, often we have to talk a lot about the economic benefits. So just a little bit, me into preaching again, is that this type of work, especially working with long distance trails, requires so much planning and thinking and management. And so these long distance trails are based on public lands. So national parks, national forests, state parks, those folks, those managers, so people that we're sending out to manage these natural areas are also managing these long distance trails. Now, the tourism industry is really into this. Now, they're not the ones who own the land, but they really do see the benefit of having tourists and visitors using these. So they see local recreationists are visiting these tourism attractions. So like I mentioned, that Great Allegheny Trail, that's a lot of local users who are using that. And so the managers of that trail are basically working with the locals in that case. But places like Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, when those are going through national parks, we're going to be seeing a lot of tourists in those areas. And so those tourists, now, whether they're from Germany or they're just from a local community right next to those trails, they're hiking on the trail. So they're doing the same activity, just coming from different areas. So there's a convergence there. Now, natural resource managers struggle with this. We do not train a lot of managers to basically say, hey, look at you, you lucky folks, you get to manage for these wonderful tourism attractions. Again, I'm the only one who really does this and teaches a recreation or tourism class. I think that might be true. Can I just say period at the University of Florida? We used to have a few again in the tourism department, but nobody really teaches this. And so unless they take if you want to be a wildlife manager or natural resource manager out there and you're planning to work for one of these agencies, unless you took my class, you're not learning a lot about how to work with visitors. And so a lot of managers well, whether they're from Germany or from Palatka, visitor is a visitor no matter where they're from. And if they're putting litter on the trail, they're walking off the trail and they're causing erosion, man, I don't care. I got to deal with them. And often most of those folks did not get into this job to deal with them. So it's like, well, what little do we have to do to basically satisfy this use? But there's so many benefits. And I think if we're not managing for those outcomes, all those things I just described kind of get lost. And what we do is have a boring trail going through boring forests. But tourists they're going out there to get stress relief achievement. And local recreationists are often spending money to go off and do these things. So this integration of tourism, recreation management, and natural resource management really is something we need our managers out there to have their brains wrapped around. And the ability to work with fellow professionals. So the natural resource manager should work with the tourism professionals. And the tourism professionals should understand a little bit about environmental conservation and sustainability. All right, so I'm finally getting to the research part of this. The way where I focus my research is understanding those folks. See all those happy cartoon people on my screen? Well, they're happy in real life too. And I want to know how we can work with them, continue to make them happy, but also ensure that we can do sustainable recreation and sustainable tourism on our conservation lands. And I take the approach is, well, we need to understand those people to basically better work with them and better manage the resource with them in mind. So there's our trail. It's the Florida National Scenic Trail, as I mentioned. Many of you might have hiked on it before. It's not like the yellow brick road that you just follow this orange trail throughout the state. What you're looking for is that orange blaze. This is the orange blaze out at Gulf Islands National Seashore, basically the northwestern terminus of the Florida National Scenic Trail out in Pensacola. So that would be one of the first things you see when you start hiking on it. And that's one of the few cases where the Florida Trail is actually going along a beautiful Florida beach. You can see if you look at the map, it quickly does a left turn and heads off to where it mostly is the interior of Florida. It doesn't hit much cultural history, so I'm going to mention that a little bit later, but where it does, I just wanted to highlight it. This is White Springs, Florida, so this is east of Tallahassee, north of us here in Gainesville, where it actually goes through White Springs. I kind of wanted to mention this because actually a goal of the Florida Trail Association was to keep it out of towns. It's always been considered more of a wilderness footpath than something that really was something for culture or historic preservation. So there was a while where it actually went around White Springs, and the managers finally, it was too difficult. There was too much private land. And so they just put it through the middle. The city people, the people who manage White Springs thought, great, let's have the hikers go right through the town. And so this is one of the few cases where it highlights that. Here's more typical. This is kind of central Florida, Ocala National Forest, going through the more uplands area. You can see that orange blaze on a pine tree there. It gets down to Lake Okeechobee, and you can see it goes around both sides of it. This is the most heavily used part of the Florida National Scenic Trail, mainly because it's easy to access and it's right by most Floridians. So actually, there's a few communities that are right next to it too. You just walk out your front door, you can hike on the Florida Trail there. And so that's a very heavily used part of the trail. And then finally, it ends. The southern terminus is in Big Cypress National Preserve, and you can see walking through swamps and getting your feet wet down there in Big Cypress. Most of our surveys and what you'll be hearing about today is people surveyed in the northern part of the Florida National Scenic Trail. We didn't do many surveys south of Orlando. Okay, so just quickly, I've mentioned this a little bit already. It's one of 11 National Scenic Trails. It's about 1,000 miles long. This project was basically collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service, which administers the trail, and then the Florida Trail Association. We've been working with both groups since 2003, which has been very nice for me. I don't usually have a project that goes more than a year. So doing one for this long has been interesting. It's not a great, well-funded project. So most of what I'm doing is counting visitors. That's that first goal, estimating use. That's what the agencies care about. But I do as little, when I can, we try to figure out the harder questions. Who are the hikers? Why are they out there? How are they hiking? And what do they want? That's what we're going to get in here today. So for a few years, I had good funding. And so that's what you're going to be seeing is the research that we did when we got some pretty good samples from hikers on the Florida that were out there. So this is basically, we're using tourism theory in this case. What's called push-pull factors of recreation or of tourism. The pull factors are what about that attraction draws in visitors. So is it the activities they offer, the setting it offers? So we asked, the first question you're going to be hearing from today is, what are the major pull factors that attract visitors to the FNST? And then how are visitors different based on what pulls them to the FNST? And so when we think about visitation, kind of the one-dimensional way to think about it is the things that we can see, right? What activities they do, what race are they? Even race is actually hard. Gender is hard too, but basically a lot of just basic sociodemographic activity segmentation. That's kind of typical, and it doesn't give us a lot, especially for this. If we did it by activity participation, well, hikers, then kind of we're done with that, not thinking about it. And so activity doesn't do much for us on this one. Demographics, you'll see, is not that great either, because we kind of got a homogeneous group. But those don't really matter anyway. No matter what your race is, gender, things like that, it's what you want out of an attraction. And if you think about the reasons when you go off into nature, if I went to survey this group, everybody listening to us, you'd all give me different reasons about why the last time you went out. It might be to be with your family. It might be to go experience something new. It might be to get a sense of achievement. It might be a sense of place or just to relax. Well, if those are all different reasons, and we got to manage differently for all those different reasons. So what we're going to do is basically this market segmentation approach, where we basically are going to group visitors based on what they want out of a trail. So basically, we did the surveys for about a 2-year period from 2011 to 13. We got about 328 surveys. We asked many questions on our survey, but 14 items were what we really asked. These were the pull attributes. I'll give you those examples in a minute, but we asked them on a scale of 1 to 5. If you list a 1, you say, I don't care at all about that. Not at all important, with 5 being very important. We used multivariate statistics then to do that segmentation. So we let statistics put the visitors into groups based on how they answered those questions, so those 14 different items. And then we did 2 basic statistics to compare visitors on other aspects. We used ANOVAs and we used chi-square tests. So I'll show you those results in a little bit here. All right, so let me talk about the overall sample. Very typical of a sample when we go off and survey visitors in natural areas, especially in northern Florida. Maybe a little bit more male dominated than usual. We kind of see, I guess, it's usually a little bit more 50-50, but in this case, we saw 63% of our participants were male, 58% married, and a third were single. Over 90% were white. And this always makes me cringe, because this is not the Florida population. This is not the US population. But when we do samples, we can see, yes, we are catering to the white Caucasian group out there, which does show, and most agencies recognize this, is that they need to basically say, well, we need to work with other demographic groups out there too. Fairly well educated, with almost 2/3 being college educated. And then income was actually well distributed. So we actually had a fairly good group of low to middle income, as well as high income. And this changes. If you do national park surveys, you're going to start seeing it skew a little bit more to the middle to the high income folks. But in this case, again, because the trail is kind of hitting, actually, I think the stat is almost every Floridian lives within 2 hours of Florida National Scenic Trail. So it's a pretty accessible to a large group of people. All right, so this is the 14 pull attributes. So this is what I meant by a pull attribute there. So when you were, if you were a respondent to my survey here, you would see how important was each of the following attributes. And you would see somewhere there, wilderness and undisturbed nature. And you would rate that on a scale of 1 to 5. Well, you can see by these results here that most people rated wilderness and undisturbed nature pretty high. That dark blue shows the proportion of people who rated it very important. Very few people said not important to not very important. So that little light blue and orange is very small. If we go down to the bottom, you can see, well, hunting, not rated so high. So instead of explaining each one of these and taking the rest of your day, these can easily be grouped up. And it's interesting because they can kind of group up by order of importance. The ones that got the highest ratings tended to basically be environmental focused things. So wildlife, wilderness, nature. That's why people are going off to the Florida National Scenic Trail. This is not a surprise. It's called National Scenic Trail. That scenery part has to do with all that stuff. Also, the Florida Trail Association, they have been picking some of the prettiest parts of Florida to manage this trail. So the trail goes through some of the most gorgeous areas of Florida. So it's designed to be that way. As I mentioned before, it avoids urban areas in many cases. It goes around places that have been developed. So it's basically been designed for those attributes. And so the people coming out say, that's what we want. It is not designed for extraction activities. Now, the trail does go through areas that people can hunt, like national forest lands you can hunt on, water management districts you can hunt on. And so it does go through hunting, but that's not why people were hiking on the trail. We did not survey on. So it was not, while we did get some people who did fish and some hunters that were using the trailheads to go out, not seeing this as a highly rated bunch of attributes. As I mentioned before, it really doesn't hit much cultural and historic attributes either. Just now that section through White Springs and a few other places. But again, culture and history is not a big thing. So people tend not to say, they're not as giving it as low ratings as the extraction activities. But again, this isn't a priority for most of our visitors. What is tended to be more of a priority, not as much as the natural aspects, is the ease of access. And this makes the Florida Trail pretty unique. You know, you wouldn't see this for the Pacific Crest Trail or Continental Divide Trail that tend to be mostly far away from cities and hard to get to. But for the Florida National Scenic Trail that basically skirts Orlando and goes through Orlando suburbs, is only about 40 minutes from Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, places like that. So getting to it is something that some people value and recognize why that's an important quality. So easy access, close to home, and then those nice things there, available parking, something that they value. So those are the 14. Everybody rated each one of these. You're seeing the proportion. What we did now is some multivariate statistics where we used people's responses to those pull factors. So how much they liked those or how much they thought those factors were important, and put them into groups. So I'll explain those 4 groups to you now. And we'll just go in order here. Group 1 always drives me nuts. And I always see, when I've done a lot of these market segmentations before, and there's always this group of people like, why are they even out there? They don't rate anything high. And so you can see they rated the water features, wilderness got a 4. So that finally, one thing that gets over 4, they're there. But most things they're rating rather low. And so I didn't highlight anything here. Group 2, where they really stand out, is they rated this easy access, close to home, and parking higher than most groups. If you look, well, let me explain again. We use multivariate statistics to group them. Then we go see, well, how were they differentiated? What cluster analysis did was said, there's this group of people who like this easy access, and you can see when we did an ANOVA. So ANOVAs were significant for every one of these items. We did a post hoc test. So once we see the significance, well, we wanted to see which group was higher than what was significantly higher. This is the only time that group 2 came out higher than most groups, except for 4 in a couple of cases. came out higher was easy access. So we're going to say this group really likes this. They do not like extraction activities. They rated those fairly low. So you can see usually they were tied down there with 1 on the lowest scores, 1.1 or 1.2, 1.4. So they're pretty low on those. Group C, they came out pretty high on these environmental and nature and wilderness aspects. Look at that, look at this, 4.7. So almost everybody in this group rated it as a 5. And this is our largest group. So 88 people basically fell into this. So this is fairly an environmental, and they again hated the extraction activities. They're rating these very low. Now look at this group, group 4, they came out significantly higher for the extraction activities, but they actually they're pretty high everywhere. I mean, they were even high for easy access. And we often see this, when we do this, there's a group of people that have low, then there's usually a group of people that come out high. And so these groups tend to be kind of open to everything. You know, they're not really against any type of activity, and they're fine. They might not be fishing and hunting out there, but they're fine with it. They do like the nature aspects, and they also like that they're close to home. What we found out when we did this is that the cultural aspects did not really factor into our differentiation very much. So we just took those out to keep it less complicated. So instead of just calling them 1, 2, 3, 4 for the rest of this talk, I'm going to basically call them by a little description of who they are. That first group that rated almost everything low, we're going to call it low enthusiastic. That second group, which is about a quarter of our sample, 26%, these are the ones that really focused in on having it close to home, easy access, easy parking. So we're going to call them convenience and non-consumptive. And remember, they didn't like those extractive activities very much, or extractive opportunities. The third basically rated those environmental aspects high, wilderness, water, wildlife pretty high, but also rated those hunting and fishing pretty low. So we're going to call them non-consumptive. We could have called them environmental too here. And then finally, fourth, open to everything. Hey, they will even go fishing and hunting is even fine with them, but they really like the nature. They like it being easy access. So they're open to everything. We'll call those opportunistic. All right, so now there's our segmentation, but we don't want to end there. Managers, at least they know these 4 groups exist, but managers need to do something with it. So we need to know more than just why they're there, but how does the why relate to their behavior out on the trail, their past behavior, and then other aspects, where they're from and things like that. So we want to start doing some more tests. So now we'll start doing more ANOVAs and more chi-squares to see how these relate to other variables. Okay, so in terms of new or returning visitors, so we got our 4 groups here: low enthusiastic, convenience, non-consumptive, and opportunistic. I can point out the ends of this. The low enthusiastic visitors tend to be the first time they were ever been on that trail is when we contacted. Almost 60% tended to be out there. Only 41% had been out before. As opposed to opportunistic, the ones who just really love the trail and go out and find many different reasons to like it, 68% are returning visitors. Not much difference in there in the middle of those, convenience or non-consumptive. Now, how often have they come out to it? We can see low enthusiastic have never been out before. 2/3 of them have not been out to the trail in the last 12 months. But look at the opportunistic, they're all over the place. 25% of our opportunistic sample has been out more than 20 times. I can't think of anything except for my office that I've been to more than 20 times over a year usually. So they are really hitting those recreation areas hard. What's also, we can see a little bump over here with convenience. It gets up to about 15% on that too. But generally a lot of people are kind of going off low, about 1 to 6 times. That tends to be more like what I do. If there's a place I really like out there that I like to go hiking or camping in, I can mainly maybe get to it 1 to 5 times a year. I'm not hitting many places more than 20 times a year. Okay, when they're out there, how much time do they spend on the trail? We can see that the orange bar, which is about a few hours to half a day, which seems typical. I think a lot of us can identify with that. Going on a hike, you know, you're not going to spend all day out there. You might not be backpacking it, but you're also going to do more than an hour. If you're going out to a trail, you want to go more than an hour. So we can see that most of our folks are spending a lot of time out there. We can see, though, the non-consumptive. So this was the group that rated wilderness, wildlife, water things high. 1/3 of them are spending more than a day out there. Remember, camping was also part of that. So they like the camping opportunities. So that group tends to be spending more time out there. Miles hiked, when they're out there, you can see our opportunistic group is going for broke. Man, they're getting out there and they're hiking more than 10 miles a day, where most groups are basically at least half of the sample is only hiking about 1 to 5 miles a day. Again, something that I can kind of identify with. All right, we're going to change it up a little bit. Let me go back to the whole sample. But this makes it, when we're thinking about tourism versus recreation, we want to think about where these people are coming from. So we surveyed people, we asked them what zip code their primary residence was. We found that only 5% of our sample came from the same zip code as where we surveyed them, which also makes sense because if we're surveying in the middle of the Ocala National Forest, well, how many people live in the middle of the Ocala National Forest? And so you're not going to get a lot of people who are coming right from that area. We did get 5% though. We saw 15% now came from a neighboring zip code. So this might be a community close to where the trailhead was that we surveyed people. We see 13% came from a neighbor of a neighbor, and so a little bit farther away, maybe a county away, something like that. But the majority of our sample basically is coming from somewhere in Florida. So they're driving a while, maybe an hour or so to get to these recreation areas. So 57% of our sample is coming from somewhere else within Florida, but 2 zip codes away from our recreation site. And then 10% we can call official tourists. They're coming from outside of Florida. So I'm going to divide this up a little bit now. So each group of bars is basically where they're coming from, because you can really see the differentiation in this case, especially if you look at out-of-state visitors. Out-of-state visitors, 63% of people who say they came from out of state tended to be very environmental focused or camping type visitors. So that's almost 2/3 of our visitors. Look over at people who came from just a little bit away. We got 0 non-consumptive people of those 15 people who basically came from the same zip code. Within the state, we can see if you're driving to this trail and you're driving reasonably far, you tend to be more of a non-consumptive type user. So you're going out there for wilderness, for camping, and for wildlife, things like that. Now, when we get a little closer, we're seeing the opportunistic people pop up. 40% of neighbor of a neighbor basically popped up. And so what now is we're seeing that no matter where you drive from has to do with the type of attraction you're going to want to see in those areas. Here, convenience people, not surprisingly, so our 43% of our same zip code and 31%, the highest bar neighbor, they're convenience people, right? So they're valuing, hey, it's just right down the street or it's not too far away. So that basically works with our sample. That makes sense. Okay, so let me wrap this up. I got a few more minutes here, so I guess time for questions. But this is what I'll do is I'll kind of boil it all down to let's describe these people. If I'm a manager now, instead of just saying I'm going to manage the men or the women, or to manage the Caucasians and the Latinos, it's like, no, I'm going to manage people now on why they care about my trail. So opportunistic people, what we know again is that they basically appreciate all aspects of the trail, and they'll do everything on there. They'll even kayak if that's an opportunity out there. They tend to be people who come back a lot to the trail, and they tend to do a lot of different things and appreciate a lot of different qualities of the area. They're high past users, so they come back a lot. They did not drive a lot, but they did hike. They didn't drive far, but they hiked the farthest. Remember, these are people who tend to hike a lot more when they're on the trail. So what does this mean for managers? Well, these folks these are our trail champions. They're the ones that have told us they love all aspects of our trail. So we would love to have them out there telling other people how wonderful the trail is. They're also good people to basically be on advisory groups or collaborative groups, and we can involve them in the decision making. And if we're going to make changes to trails, there's a very good chance that these are the people who will be angry at us at first. And so they're a good group to go for to basically make sure we can avoid conflict in the future. And we also know they're not coming from that far away. They're from like a neighbor of a neighbor. So, we can get them.
Sorry, did you say?
We can get them from relatively early areas or easy areas. So the non-consumptive users, these are the ones who basically rated camping. The camping attributes high, but wilderness and wildlife were high. This was our largest group of the sample. So this is an important group of managers to think about. They're long distance visitors. Remember, they came from either out of state, they're Florida people or out of state people. They spent a longer time on the trail. So they didn't go, maybe they weren't the high number of miles, but they did spend more than one day there. And so in this case, we could say, here's our typical tourists. These are the people who will spend money when they're wanting to hike on the Florida National Scenic Trail. And so for these folks, we kind of maybe want more of them out there because they're spending money and they're coming far and they appreciate the natural aspects of the trail. So this would be a good thing to promote to people outside of Florida. We want to hike on the National Scenic Trail, highlight those natural aspects and those more wilderness aspects. And then also let's get their money. You know, they're coming farther, then maybe they want to spend the night close to the trail. So different types of lodging options or other types of tourism services might be beneficial for them. Then we got this really good group, and this is a group I really focus in on my research because I didn't say this, but previous research on our trail visitors is showing that families do not tend to come out to the Florida Trail that much. And that's too bad because we got a lot of families in Florida who need to get their kids outside. And we got this trail that's going right past many of their neighborhoods. So this would be a group that does value those convenience type attributes. Now, while they valued having it close to their home, having an accessible parking area and having it be easy to get to, the next things they rated higher were the natural qualities. They want wilderness, they want wildlife. So, you know, they're asking a lot, right? They want to drive maybe 15, 20 minutes, park somewhere, walk a few minutes into an area and see an alligator or see something cool out there, see something natural and be excited, then get back in and go home. So they want wilderness, easy to get to, which we can do in Florida. I mean, we got some natural areas that are close to our suburbs. It's called the wildland urban interface. And so this is somewhere where, since we know this is a low demographic to the Florida National Scenic Trail, it should be something that families, we market and promote aspects of the Florida Trail to. So again, highlight the convenience aspects while we want to show them the natural areas. Say, yeah, they're here and you don't have to go far and you don't have to work too hard to get to them. But then also we need to help serve these folks. If we want families out there, that means bathrooms probably need to be there, clean bathrooms and other facilities. So, you know, just putting a Lime Rock trailhead parking area and saying, good luck, you know, go park. You're probably gonna have to put the bathroom there too, and put plenty of signage out so they know how long the trails are and they kind of have a little better idea of what's there. And then finally, the last group are this weird group of people who just don't seem to want to be there that much. They have low motivation for aspects. When we looked at what their past behavior, they tend to be first-time visitors. They don't spend that much time on the trail, and they travel the least on the trail. So they didn't go too far when they were on the trail. They put least importance on almost all major pull attributes. So it's really unclear what factors pulled them there and what attributes might help them better enjoy their experience or have them come back. My thinking is that they're, you know, they want to be there with their partner, their family, friends, you know, and we somehow surveyed them when we did our surveys. And so they kind of have that peer pressure aspect, which we really didn't ask in our questionnaire. And so, you know, this is kind of a good group to kind of keep out there. I mean, they're a group that we maybe want to get more motivated, and they're out there. So it's a chance for managers to talk to them, maybe increase education or increase their awareness about the area. But really, before I speculate too much, it's something we really need to factor in a little bit. All right, so that's the last little bit of the presentation. I'll end it. See if you can recognize that guy. And just to show how long I've done this study, this was, I think, and with one of my old grad students too. This is from a few years ago when I used to have facial hair, when we were doing a project with the Florida Trail Association up by White Springs. But just a gorgeous trail, one of my favorite places to be in Florida. So if you haven't been on the Florida National Scenic Trail, if you get anything out of this talk, hopefully now I've inspired you to go off a little bit. All right, so I think I left about 10 minutes, and so I can stop sharing and answer any questions if there are any.
All right, well, thank you, Taylor. I really appreciate that. That was really interesting. If it's okay, I'd like to ask a question because I noticed something in there that I was just curious about. So when you were talking about the 4 different groups and the amount of time that they spent on the trail, I noticed one day, like I think in each category, the category of one day was the least chosen. And I was wondering why that is, like why it jumped from, you know, half a day to more than a day.
Well, I think one day is a lot, I think, to go out on a trail. And if you're going to go spend that time, then just put your backpack on and really go for it. So I think it just, I mean, that's what we're seeing in statistics, is that basically if you got that weird gap, you got people like me, when I go hiking, I'm probably going to be 2 hours. That's my typical time, but I'm not going to be a 5-hour hiker. Now, you know, if I want to go, then, so what happens, you're just not going to get that. It could also be an element of Florida, is that we often, if you go to other places in the country, you might have a long trail to an attraction, a viewpoint, like hiking up a mountain, getting to the top of a mountain, getting down, hiking to a waterfall. And those might be something that often will get you out for more than a half a day to do those long hikes. Florida, it's like saying, well, I just want to enjoy Florida for a while, but I'm not going to spend 6 hours enjoying Florida. I'm either going to enjoy it for a couple of days. But again, even the backpacking aspect, there wasn't a lot of people doing that. But so I think this is kind of a typical Florida thing. And again, most people really, they're not the 6-hour hikers out there. They're the 1 to 2 hour hikers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. That makes
But
sense.
but it's a good question, and we don't have documentation of that stuff. So it's good we know it.
Okay. I see some hands up.
Yeah, I guess I see Pablo first on my screen.
Hi, so thank you for the presentation first. I really enjoyed it. And I have 2 questions actually. So I wasn't surprised, but I was discouraged by the demographics. So one, I wanted to ask, are there like any surveys going on for different demographics that maybe are not using those spaces to understand the reasons why they are doing so? And the second question is that we know from different people, like for example, the Blackbirders community, that they are expressing how being in these rural areas can be especially dangerous for them. So what is being done to address that situation and to make it also safer for them, so that we can have a more diverse population using them?
Great questions, Pablo. And it's that's my favorite topic. So I'll try not to spend the rest of the time just talking about that, but it's hard. So yes, there is work that's going on. What you're asking though is do a non-visitor study, right? So go talk to people who aren't coming, but nobody wants to fund that. Who's going to fund the non-visitor studies? These agencies want to improve their management. And so they're saying, well, who's out here? So we'll fund you to go do the management. So it's hard to get those studies, but luckily I've been able to sneak stuff in. I work with Hillsborough County, and they want to serve all of Hillsborough County residents. So we did exactly what you said. We asked them about why they haven't been, and Allison was on that project with me, so she knows a little bit about this. And we had a grad student that Allison and I advised basically focused in, and he focused in on African Americans and their attitudes and perceptions and what we call that recreation barriers. And so we're trying to identify and quantify what the barriers are for them. And you're right, safety was an issue, but that tends not to be the overwhelming issue. It tends to be a lot about lifestyle, lack of information, and also just preference. Is that culturally, in many cases, the natural, at least what they see as a reason for going outside, there's better things to do. And so they often will not take the time to do it. So we got to work through many barriers and then figure out, if we do want to serve a diverse public, how do we make our natural areas at least be perceived to have the opportunities that more diverse Americans want to get out of it. The Blackbirder aspect did show that there is danger perceived out there, and we do see that. I would also say we see that with women too. Women tend to rate safety aspects higher than men do. And so it is something we do need to think about. But then also we did our survey during COVID, and safety popped up high there, but I also think that was because of a virus that was scaring people. And so that complicated our results a little bit. But again, Amante basically drove down into that. So we're going to we have more of a qualitative study looking at that. And so hopefully we'll be able to answer your question better. But it is one of my big things. So hopefully I helped. And if you have more questions, I can answer those later. Ernesto, I see you next.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor, for the presentation. This long distance trail are seen like a conservation tool or conservation strategy. And how do you think that we can use this diagnostic about the users to improve environmental education strategies, or make a better job as to change behaviors, etc.? What do you think?
Well, you asked a lot there. I mean, I don't think, you say change behaviors at the end. Are you talking about changing behaviors of the hikers or just of every human being out there? Because we're all destroying.
Yeah, for the users in general.
Yeah, well, I mean, users, I think that's usually a factor in the high use areas. So for me on the Florida National Scenic Trail, it's not an issue because the Florida National Scenic Trail does not get high use. There's very few places where we can look at use on the FNST and say, oh, look at all those problems from all the hikers. Now you go to Great Smoky Mountains, you know these places, Rocky Mountain National Park, then yeah, side trails, erosion, wildlife impacts are there. And so in that case, you know, it's managers doing their jobs, educating, enforcement, and those aspects. But I think more on the first part of your question is most people are motivated because of the natural aspects. That is why people are going out to those trails. Even the people who want convenient, easy access places, the next thing they say, the reason why they want is to go see healthy ecosystems. Tourism businesses say, well, cool, let's get more people here. And then we look at why tourists come, it's for the natural aspects. So this research says, look, if we are creating and managing natural aspects, we're creating a valuable tourism destination. So to me, that says, let's make more of them. And if we put it in this corridor that provides better hiking opportunities, then we're providing actually adjacent natural ecosystems that will provide better wildlife habitat, better ecosystem management. And so everything I do about ecotourism is basically putting a value on natural and well-managed ecosystems. And I think this is just one aspect of that falls right in line with natural corridors, right? Now, I would love to think the Florida National Scenic Trail would be this really wide corridor all the way from Big Cypress to Pensacola. That's not going to happen. But in some cases, we can work on it. And in some places, like a ride around Orlando, they're starting to get a little ring on the east side of Orlando with counties and cities that are buying up land for conservation, but also to connect that trail. And so connecting the trail has motivated city and counties to buy up land and protect it. And that is protection land that wildlife can benefit from. Good question. Thanks. All right. Nobody has any more questions.
You explained it very, very well. All right, we do have time for one more question if anybody has one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the group one, the low enthusiasm group, and that it's possible their main motivating factor are social factors. Is there a plan to do a study to see if that's the case?
No, I don't know. I would love to, but you say that, Chad. I've seen that group since my master's student days, so in 1992, and I haven't come up with a plan since then. So it's been 30 years. I still haven't figured it out. So I would like to. I mean, and it could be if we did demographics on that, if we saw some issues there with like you know, those groups that Pablo asked me about tend to also be there, then we are starting to get to them. But yeah, I tend to see we don't see much differences there. It's a good question though.
Okay, well, Dr. Stein, thank you again for joining us today. That was really awesome. And I want to remind everybody else that if you do have some follow-up questions, Dr. Stein's contact information is on the flyer that went out this week. And obviously, if you have questions for me or concerns, feel free to get in touch with me anytime. Otherwise, thank you everybody for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.